The world is becoming increasingly proficient at telling stories that deny God. As such, we need Thinking Christian to become as natural as breathing. Welcome to the Thinking Christian podcast. I'm Dr. James Spencer. Through calm, thoughtful, theological discussions, Thinking Christian highlights the ways God is working in the world and questions the underlying social, cultural, and political assumptions that hinder Christians from becoming more like Christ. Now, on to today's episode of Thinking Christian. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Thinking Christian. I am Dr. James Spencer, and I'm joined today by Mark Matlock. He is the author of Faith for the Curious, How an Era of Spiritual Openness Shapes the Way We Live and Help Others Follow Jesus. He's also a senior fellow at Barna and a facilitator of innovation and impact, and he's also the founder of Wisdom Works. And so I'm excited to dive into this book. I read it. I found out a lot that I didn't know. And I was pretty excited to see some of this data, and so I'm excited to jump into it with you, Mark. Mark, how you doing?
Doing great. It's great to be with you here, James.
Yeah, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for coming on. This is good.
Yeah, we're a part of the Black Jacket Club today.
Yeah. Well, this is how I cover up my T-shirt. So
yeah, me too.
This is all it is. Yeah, occasionally
really dresses it up.
Yeah, occasionally I just go right with the T-shirt because I'm kind of lazy. But today I decided, nope, I'll get fancy for you. So here I am. Hey, man, this book, I really loved it. I thought it was great. And I think that I thought it was great because I've been doing a lot of research in the political arena and reading through, some of the gloom and doom of this political season. And so when I was reading your book, I was thinking to myself, wow, this is a kind of an uplifting message. This is actually a positive set of data that I'm reading right now that gives me more hope than gloom and doom. It wasn't a sky is falling sort of book. And so I'm just interested, why don't we start by maybe talking about how you got into this research, why you were interested in this research in the first place, and then we'll kind of talk through maybe some of your findings.
Yeah, well, it was kind of interesting. So I've been working with Barna for 20 some years. Started as a client, actually.
Yeah.
And one of the first projects I did was when David Kinnaman, the president of Barna, who owns it now, he literally was just out of college, and he went to Biola with my brothers, and I had gone several years ahead of them. And I call the Barna group to do a research project, not knowing what I'm getting into. And Dave answers the phone. And so I told him what I wanted to do, and he goes to George, and George is kind of like, this time it's me and a band called Mercy Me that we're working out of our garage running these student conferences across the country, right?
Yeah.
And we got enough money to rub two nickels together and maybe make a spark and get a fire going. So anyway, George goes, look, I don't think you have enough money to do this, but I'll tell you what, if I'll do it for cost. Because I really believe in this project and we don't do enough research on young people, you'll work with David. And this began like a decades-long relationship with David Kinnaman, where he's one of my closest friends. And when I've helped him with a lot of different projects that he's worked on, just doing analysis and looking at things, helping him frame different data insights, working with Barna's clients to help them figure out how to put things into action. Anyway, working with all of these other clients, people like the American Bible Society, He Gets Us, Alpha, I started noticing that there was this like chunk of people that didn't fit into the boxes most of us have when we think about the unchurched.
Yeah.
And I wanted to try to discover more about them. ABS, American Bible Society, calls them the movable middle. But they represent about 70 million to 188 million, depending on which data variables you use to slice them, that are not hostile to Christianity, that actually want to grow spiritually. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily interested in Christianity, but they want to grow spiritually. And so we started realizing there's this real openness. And I started realizing that a lot of the churches that I was working with, the ministries that I was working with, had gotten into this, like you said, the sky is falling, gloom is doom approach. Yeah. And the people that they were encountering were some of the most hostile people to Christianity. Right. And they were kind of ignoring this larger segment of the population. Yeah. So that was kind of what got me into it. And then my children, who are 25 and 28, they really aren't children, but I started interacting with their friends, and they are artists and creatives, And a lot of the people that I was running into, that I was meeting through them, they really had no religious history or understanding. When they heard that I was a minister, the only thing that meant to them, that I was an evangelical minister, was, oh, you must have voted for Donald Trump. That's the only thing that they assumed about me.
Which is
Other than that,
exactly what you want them to assume. I
is
mean, let's
exact
face it. Like that's what you want to lead with all the
Jesus
time.
or
Who you
Donald
voted
Trump.
for.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So it was really interesting in talking with them how blown away they were by, oh, wow, you're not like anything like what I thought a Christian would be like. And there's these huge
Yeah.
misperceptions. So that kind of led me to kind of think I would like to go into the field and see if we can figure out what's going on with this group of people with a little more, a little more definition, and try to see if we can learn some things could really help the church maybe reframe this moment that we're in. And what we found is this group of people that we call the curious. And further research actually showed us that there was actually two groups within that curious group. But we can talk about that a little bit more.
That's cool. I will say, I mean, I think when I just was watching yesterday, the guy who played Dwight Schrute, and I'm blanking on his name right now.
Rainn Wilson.
Rainn Wilson. He does a show called Soul Boom.
Yeah.
It's a new podcast, and he just had a lady on who was talking about the difference between spirituality and religion, or encouraging spiritual thought, and those kind of things. And so I'm watching this, and I knew we had our interview coming up, and I'm like, this is interesting because there is, it seems, an ongoing interest in the spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many things then that can fill that gap, at least for a certain time. So I've been following like the work of John Vervaeke and Jordan
Mm-hmm.
Peterson. John Vervaeke did the Meaning Crisis. Jordan
Mm-hmm.
Peterson talks an awful lot. He's got his Bible series and does all his things. And it's like, this is in some ways, I think, confirming to what you're talking about. There are a lot of people who are willing to listen to this kind of idea, this sort of spiritual things idea. And I'm fascinated that the data actually demonstrates that these folks are curious about, would you say it's about spiritual things as opposed to religion? Would you say it's about Jesus specifically? Like, what are they curious about? What are they curious about? And then as a follow-up, what's driving that curiosity?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have a fun story about Rainn Wilson, the guy who played Dwight Schrute.
Cool,
So he was speaking out here at the Dallas Museum of Art, and we have a membership there, so we got invited to like a members, kind of reception with him thing, and he signed a book for my daughter Sky, and he signed it Sky and Rain together again at last. I thought, man, that's quick.
That's nice.
But what was so fascinating to me about that, about his presentation was, here he is, he's a television personality, he's funny, an actor, but what he really wanted to talk about was a search for meaning in his life. And finding this something deeper that was out there, and no matter what. And Pete Holmes, comedian, went to a Christian college, Gordon College, studied youth ministry, thought that's where he was going to go, and then he went on this journey as well. And there's a lot of that going on. And so what we wanted to do was try to see how to tease out this group, try to understand them better. So what we measured was, first of all, do you believe that there's more than what we experience with our five senses? So is there a supernatural realm? Is there something greater? And then we measured another set of variables, which was how curious a person was. And there are some wonderful sets of research done by a guy named Todd Cashden on looking at how to measure curiosity in a person. And so we used that scale. And then from that, we found this group. And in that were two really extreme groups. One is what we call the spiritually curious, and the other is what we call the curious skeptic. And the curious skeptics were actually kind of like the surprise. We were expecting to find the spiritually curious group, but then we found that there was actually like something that made these two groups a little bit different from one another. And so we teased that out in the data. And the spiritually curious basically believe there is something more than what I physically experience. And the overwhelming majority of Americans believe that. So they are dialed into the fact that there is more out there. Now, there's less than 10% of American population that believes that the physical world is all there is. We call them naturalists. There is some degree of curiosity within them, but they weren't our focus because they don't believe in a supernatural world. And that is kind of the traditional group that I think a lot of apologists and evangelists think of, and what a lot of us in the pew just think of when we think of a non-Christian. Well, you believe in evolution, there is no God, that kind of thing. The overwhelming majority of Americans believe there's God. And in fact, 55% of the spiritually curious believe that they will be accountable for how they've lived their life when they die. So there's even a sense of moral punishment for the way that they live on earth. So that was just mind-boggling when we kind of went in and diced the data up that way, right? But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're interested in Christianity specifically.
Sure.
So anyway, so when we're doing this, we also, had pulled out practicing Christians in this group, and we measured their levels of curiosity as well. And interestingly, the curiosity levels are very different for people inside the church than outside of the church. And that kind of led me to just wonder, like, is there a culture that we've created within the church that is not wonder seeking? We're seeking information for certainty as opposed to wonder and, exploration of what's beyond and mystery. And maybe that's why church is so boring to so many people, is because there isn't a sense of discovery. And in God's creation, he's created everything with a sense of mystery and discovery. Yet in the church, we might be creating something around what we call our need for closure, which is getting information so that I don't have ambiguity in my life. So that's kind of the interesting hypothesis that kind of drove the book and why I think Baker and Barna let me pursue it.
Well, I mean, a couple of just comments on that. I think it's fascinating the amount of information and response that we give to the naturalists, or that materialist sort of perspective, where the general perception is they don't believe anything exists beyond just our meat, the matter and things around us. And for that group to be such a relatively small group is sort of crazy. And it's interesting to hear, okay, there's a God out there. We're accountable to that God. But then we also have this intermingling of probably scientific perspectives and all of these different other areas that sort of inform our broader worldview. And so it becomes a little bit a mixed bag, I would assume. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of describing it. Yeah, for sure. And I think what's interesting is that, like, what I started noticing is I'm sitting on airplanes, I'm starting to have conversations with people next to me, and there's always a point when, like, it comes up. So, what do you do for a living?
Sure.
And I never answer usually the same way twice. Sometimes I'm an author. Sometimes I'm a magician. Sometimes I'm a nonprofit a consultant. Sometimes I'm a nonprofit executive. Sometimes I am a minister. If every one of those conversations, regardless of where it starts, will end with me being an ordained minister. But it doesn't always start there, because once I bring that information in, depending on the person, that can be a conversation stopper right away. But what I started noticing in my interactions with people is that very few of them, once I mentioned that I was a minister and they realized that I was safe, they wanted to talk more about that.
Yeah, they have more questions.
Yes. And I'm going, where are these nobody's telling me I don't believe that. I don't believe there's anything, you know what I mean? Some of them might have some challenges about Christianity itself specifically.
Sure. Yeah.
But I wasn't running into this naturalist, this person who believes that the world just started spontaneously and, and there's nothing more out there and there's nothing that happens after we die. Almost everybody has a worldview that falls within that Judeo-Christian, even Islamic kind of worldview of a monotheistic God.
Yeah.
And that was really surprising to me. And the data kind of proved out why I'm not finding them, because there are not very many of them.
Right. You're not
You
running
know?
into Richard Dawkins on the plains very much.
Yeah,
Just,
right, right.
yeah.
And even he would say, right, like, the
Yeah.
morality of Christianity is better for the world than not, right?
And not.
So he calls
Right.
himself a secular Christian now. And,
Gee
so
whiz.
mind-boggling, right?
Yeah. It is sort of fascinating. And I guess where I'm wondering is as we approach, if we think about the majority of the people that we're going to, which is the way I'm understanding the research. So
Mm-hmm.
the majority of the people we're probably going to meet, if we're meeting, 7 out of 10 people, it's more likely for them to be part of this curious group than it is for them to be part of, a hardcore, skeptical, we hate spiritual things. We don't even want to think about it kind of people. And so how do we approach these conversations with these folks to, I think, number one, frame it out so that they're safe asking questions of us, right? People who
Mm-hmm.
have been involved in what they might consider to be spiritual pursuits, what we would call Christianity, right? How do we help them be comfortable asking us questions and them not feeling like we're just going to shove our religion down their throat kind of idea? And then I think the other side of it that I want to get to, and we can answer this question first, but I don't want to lose this. It's concerning to me that Christians aren't more curious. And so, how do we cultivate that sense of wonder and help Christians embrace the ambiguities of life, right, and not be afraid of those? So, I guess those two questions. Number one would be how do we talk to the curious folks so that we have the best shot of really engaging them well, and then number two, how do we as Christians it almost feels like we're going to have to get more curious if we're going to reach those who are curious. You know what I mean?
Well, 100%, because curious calls to curious, right? And
Yeah.
so, and we should be curious about our faith. I mean, everything
Yeah.
about Jesus' ministry was kind of based on that, right? People asking
Right.
questions, Jesus asking them questions, people being confused by what Jesus said and going,
Right.
and Jesus saying, you guys know where I'm going, and they're like, we don't know where you're going. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you're acting like we haven't
Yeah.
figured it out. We don't,
Yeah.
we see Jesus praying, and he's not saying, okay, now it's time to sign up for the course on prayer. He waits until the disciples go, Lord, teach us how to pray,
Yeah. So,
and
yeah.
so he's kind of appealing to their inquisitiveness, and
Yeah.
so one way to think about it, James, is if 20% of our population is a practicing Christian, okay,
Yeah.
that would mean that 54% are in that curious spiritual kind of a space, whether they're a skeptic or spiritually curious, they're in that space. There's about
Which is a huge amount.
17%.
Yeah.
Huge.
Huge
There's
amount.
17% who believe in a supernatural world, but they have low curiosity. Okay.
Okay.
And we
Yeah.
didn't really look deeply into that group.
Right.
And then there's the 10% that are naturalists. So you
Okay.
basically have about a three out of every four people that you talk to are likely going to be a Christian or spiritually curious.
And when
Um,
because we didn't cover this, could you just
yeah,
distinguish between the skeptics, the curious, the spiritually
yeah.
curious, and the skeptics? What's the distinction there? I know you mentioned, I meant to ask.
Yeah, so both of them believe that there's more than we can experience with our five senses, right? The
Yeah.
spiritually curious are all in. They are convinced that there is something more, and they may even
Okay.
have some definition around it. It may not just be greater energy out there or a higher power. A lot of
Yeah.
times it actually is that monotheistic view of God.
Okay.
Um, and so just that's similar across Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, that kind of
Yeah.
conception of God that all comes from, Father Abraham. And then
Yeah.
the skeptic, they will either say, I don't know that there's more. I believe there's more out there, but I can't know that for certain. So there's a little skepticism in that, even though they will say, I believe there's more, they're not as convinced of it, and they may have a little more skepticism toward it. Now,
Yeah.
what I find interesting about the skeptics are they usually have a real high sense of moral responsibility. And part of that is because they do believe that there's going to be some kind of consequence for the way that they live.
Right.
when they die, even though they don't know what it is, they're not certain of it. There's a sense of that, and so talking to them about morality and how they figure out, what is right and wrong is
Yeah.
really interesting. What they think the consequences will
Okay.
be. And once again, me not telling them what the Bible says, but saying, what do you think? Where do you
Right.
get that? Where did that come from? How
Yeah.
did you arrive at that? People love to talk about these things.
Yeah.
And usually in listening to them and really being respectful of what they had to say, and then
Yeah.
to be able to say, is it okay for me to share my story or, what I've experienced? And what's really important, though, is I think expressing and talking to them about Jesus in relational terms.
Okay.
Because I think that's where where things have fallen apart. I think the pandemic's kind of exposed some of this in our churches. We have a
Yeah.
bit of a discipleship crisis because we have people that believed ideas, but they didn't have a relationship with a person
Gotcha.
of Christ.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
the pandemic kind of revealed some of the lack of true spiritual formation and
Yeah.
development in our churches. Um, and that's not a slight on anybody. It's just a reality,
Right.
of the way church has evolved in our country.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think we're kind of waking up to that and seeing, oh, we have to help people really have a relationship with Christ, not just know the right answers. And so I
Yeah.
found those two things are really, really opening. And then you have like the seeker sensitive model, right? That a lot of our churches
Right.
gravitated toward. And it'd be real easy to say the curious are probably really interested in that. But to be honest, they actually want more intense spiritual experiences.
Yeah.
And that's what's really interesting. The seeker sensitive model almost was about making church more palatable to those who already thought church was a good idea.
Yeah.
Whereas the spiritually curious are actually looking to connect with God and the supernatural. And
Yeah.
so, and I first encountered this with the small group that I was as a volunteer leader in our youth ministry at our church. Um, you know, uh, some of the students, when I said, what do we want to learn here? They go, how do we connect to God? How do we talk to God? What is prayer really like? And I go, what if we do a few weeks where we learn how the desert fathers like prayed to connect with God? All right.
Nice. Yeah.
And so now you would think that in this really cool youth group setting where it's real easy to bring your friends because it's fun,
Yeah.
that people would be like, okay, because I even let moms and dads know because I'm like, if they talk about, we did all this breathing and I go,
All right.
I'm gonna get
It's gonna
chased
get
out of the
weird
church.
real
So I
quick.
told her,
Right.
hey, we're doing these things that are rooted in church history.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about it, right? We're not saying this is the way to do it or whatever. We're just going to see what history has taught
Yeah.
us and we're going to practice it. The students actually brought their friends. More of them came to that than came to the regular Wednesday night experience. Because they were like telling their friends, we're doing some real stuff here.
Yeah.
Like we're trying to connect to God and
That's cool.
and
Yeah.
know him. And so I think we've sometimes got it wrong, right? And
Yeah.
And that's why I think this is really important for us to really evaluate this. Now, one of the really interesting things that came out in this is this idea of kind of a DIY, do-it-yourself culture.
Sure.
That a lot of the curious people possess in this post-truth world that we live in.
Yeah.
A lot of these people, they want to have agency. They don't want an expert just to tell them what to think.
Yeah.
The need for closure people are happy to have experts tell them what to think, which is
Yeah.
a little bit higher in the church than outside of it, right? So we've created
Right.
a culture that kind of doesn't necessarily appeal to a curious mind. So does that make sense?
It does, and it's such a fascinating insight because, and I don't want to stereotype the church either, but
Right.
it does feel like there's a dynamic where we value, let's say, preaching from the front over something. I had a female pastor on the show probably 2 months ago now. And in her church, she said she had stopped preaching for a time. And what they would do is they would have someone come up and do like a corporate lament.
Mm-hmm.
and they talk about what they're experiencing in their life, and people would pray for them and those kind of things. And my comment was, it's so odd to me that you wouldn't have someone preaching the word of God, but at the same time, really appealing to me that you don't have someone doing that, at least for a time. Because I think that what it gestures toward is, look, the sermon isn't what we've made it. It's not that the preaching of the word of God isn't important, but that does sort of
100%.
play into that. Here are the 3 points you need to know about this passage. Go and do. It has a certainty to it, whereas lament it draws into something that is far more chaotic, far more, I would think, would lend itself to curiosity because it's messy. There's no immediate solution for it. You have to work to understand and connect now with the person who's in pain versus just listening to a sermon and walking away with 3 points.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
again, I don't want to stereotype the church, but
Right.
it rings true in a lot of ways where you would sit back and say, yeah, we tend to develop a hierarchical culture, and much of that hierarchical culture is around teaching. People who can teach tend to move up in the world, in the Christian world. So it's sort of fascinating. I would say the other thing I just love
It's
about,
kind of like, just to build on that for a moment.
yeah,
It's kind of the difference between like cooking for yourself and going to a restaurant where somebody's going to cook for you.
yeah,
There's a different joy that comes in making your food, and a
right,
different kind of joy in receiving something that somebody's already worked through and perfected.
yeah, yeah,
And church has become a place where we don't get to see the pastor's process or
yeah,
journey in how
yeah,
he assembled what he's sharing with us. He's
yeah,
sharing with us the conclusion, the kit after it's been assembled.
yeah,
And the DIY curious mind is like, I want to build along with you.
right,
And so, an example that I use from the book is like one of the top 20 Googled things about the Bible is, what does the Bible say about dinosaurs? And so I asked pastors, if you were to, knowing this, how
yeah,
would you present this to a curious person? And they also, well, I would, we would do an ad campaign saying, we're going to talk about what the Bible says about dinosaurs. I would prepare a sermon. Depending on what their view of Genesis was, they kind of framed it around that. And I was kind of like, now wait a minute, you're doing all this work, and you're going to provide the conclusion to the matter. But what if, you actually show them, here are 3 different approaches that Christians believe, that believe in the Bible, that have studied that. Here are 3 different views,
yeah,
and then you let people talk about what they think about them and what their experience says and
yeah,
whatever. And all of a sudden I saw these pastors, like, and I'm not being pejorative at all, but I mean, I saw them going, are you kidding? That would be the most irresponsible thing I could do, because the shepherd heart comes out, right?
yeah, yeah,
I'm here
yeah,
to take care of the sheep, not to,
right,
whatever. And I'm like, well, you still are, you know what I mean? Like sheep were constantly in peril,
yeah,
as they were moving. The shepherd just tried to, prevent the magnitude of harm or injury, right?
right,
And
right,
keep them from starving as long as they could. So, but I think the idea there was, do we have enough confidence in the Word of God and the work of the Holy Spirit that we can step out a little bit of ourselves to allow people to experience the Holy Spirit and to experience the power of His Word? I've talked to enough people who have said, I went to the Bible looking for this, and when I read it, it totally flipped the script on what I thought I was going to
yeah, yeah,
find,
yeah,
right? We've seen that, right?
yeah,
We need to have
definitely,
more confidence about that. But those are usually personal experiences that people had, just taking a Bible and reading on
sure,
their own. How
yeah.
do we do that corporately? How do we do that from a leadership perspective? It's a really different paradigm.
It is funny. I mean, I teach a Bible study on Wednesday mornings, via Zoom, and we just went through Genesis 6, 1 through 4. So the sons of God and the daughters of men, and the intermarriage there.
Uh-huh.
And so the guys in the study, they keep pushing me. They're like, but what does it really mean? And I'm like, listen, I don't know. here's like these four interpretations. This one's weird. This one's not that well supported. This one's strange too, but it's also, it's got, and so I'm just walking him through. And one of them actually said, he's like, I have no idea what the answer to these questions are. But he said, one of the things I'm getting is I'm getting insights from the process you use just to think through it. And he said, that's really interesting. And so I was really happy about that, because I didn't want to walk in and be like, okay, the sons of God are this, and the daughters of men are that. I mean, you can read 5, academic journal articles and not figure the answer to that one out. Like, everybody's got a different nuance and argument. And so I think that sometimes we do overdetermine the text, and there's a certain degree of, there's certainly core convictions that we don't want to lose sight of, but then there's also play. There's a fair degree of play, and conveying that to people, letting people have that, maybe the tension, and put forth the effort to do that, is really fascinating. I usually tell people, like, I used to be a personal trainer, and I said, I never brought a client in and said, okay, today what you're going to do is you're going to sit in the corner and watch me work out, and that's going to be your workout. Right. On some level, they have to put forth the effort in order for it to work for them. I can't put the work in for them. I can't lift the weight for them. They've got to lift it for themselves. I'm just there to sort of guide them through that weight training. And I think that sort of picture is what I hear you expressing, that these folks who are the DIYers want. They don't want to watch somebody lift weights. They want to hop in there and lift with somebody who's lifting weights. That kind of idea.
And it's and we're talking about people talking about truth, right? Like, how do I know what to trust? People right now only trust themselves as the judge of that. And we can have lots of theological conversations about the implications of that, but the reality is it's true. You know what I mean? And so, okay, I believe the power of God is bigger than you. And if you really have a sincere heart, and almost all of these people that are spiritually curious have a sincere openness to finding the truth, I don't need to be afraid of the journey that you take to get there. In fact, Jesus, I mean, think about the rich young ruler, right? I mean, that's one of the first things by the way, that I have on my agenda when I get to heaven, is to figure out what happened to that rich young ruler. Like, did he ever come back? Because I have a feeling he did. There's something in my spirit that says he came back, and I don't know that. The text never tells us that, but I feel like Jesus could have stuck with him, could have chased him down. He goes, hey, wait, we're not done yet. You made the wrong choice. Jesus let him sit and wrestle with his words, and was okay with that tension.
Yeah.
And I think even watching some of the Pharisees, right, Joseph of Arimathea and others, and Nicodemus, who were struggling along the way, right? They were Pharisees, but yet they were listening and they were watching. And as certain things came to be, they started realizing this really is the Messiah. And their faith became real, and their heart was maybe more curious than others who were protecting other things. So I think we have to be really careful about that, but just understand that that's what it's going to take in this moment. We can't just reach into our old bag of tricks and think that that's going to reach people. And that's the other thing too, is a lot of our evangelism become very transactional. And where it's all, and a lot of that was based on efficiency, right? How do I share the gospel with as many people as quickly as possible?
Right.
This is slower work, and it has to be rooted in real relationship. And that means, it's going to take some time, and you have to have a genuine interest in the person. If you don't, it's not going to work. These aren't tricks. That was the hardest thing writing the book, was how do you take these insights and not make them sound like tricks or gimmicks or tactics to make a person believe, or to, hook a lost person. You know what I mean? That's not what this is about. This is about introducing people to Jesus Christ and understanding their frame of reference, because ours within the church has grown so far apart from that we almost are missing each other.
But it's really, I think a lot of my work that I've done here recently has revolved around this idea of embodied cognition. So we experience the world physically. We don't just know propositionally in our heads. We also know, like, procedurally. I know how to ride a bike, and that's different than knowing that a bike is a mode of transportation. I actually know how to do it. And because I know how to do it, then the bike becomes relevant if I need a mode of transportation, right? I can walk out in my garage, and if my cars are all broken, but I have a bike on the wall, that now is relevant to me if I need to go somewhere. And so that's a different way of knowing. These are John Vervaeke's categories, not mine. But then he talks about participatory knowing, and he says, think about, if you've ever ridden a bike, what it feels like to have your quads burning as you're going up a hill and have the wind blowing over your face when you're going down that hill. But someone who's never ridden a bike doesn't know that. Propositionally, they could get it. Sure, I understand that your quads would burn. Sure, I understand there's wind. Sure, whatever. But they don't know it. And those are different ways of really experiencing the world and knowing the world. And that last one is very much that embodied cognition. And so when you think about that and just realize that we are experiencing the world in a particular way, and that we can challenge other people to take a journey where they're experiencing not only the world, but hopefully experiencing God in that world. That's just sort of a new and fascinating way for us to take these curious people on a ride and say, God will meet you if you just keep moving in this direction. Like, we can trust God to do that. And we can fill in some of the gaps so that their experience, which can be inherently ambiguous, right? We don't always understand where things are coming from. That's sort of the general revelation problem. But we can fill that in and say, no, that's probably God. And here's been my experience with this, and this is how I see this working. But my intuitive sense is, and this goes back to that question of why isn't the church more curious, is that we don't think like that. We know stuff about God. We maybe have had some experiences with God, but on our day-to-day basis, we don't really view the world as if God is an active participant in everything we do. Is that a fair, sort of?
I think you're nailing it. Yeah, it's kind of like there's that scene in that movie Good Will Hunting.
Yeah,
where you've got Matt Damon's character who's like a super genius. And Robin Williams kind of is this therapist assigned to work with this super genius kid. This kid's never been outside of Boston. He's read every book, has a photographic memory, and every therapist is bailed on him. Robin Williams sticks it out, and they get in a fight, and then they meet out by the pond, and he just basically says, you've probably seen pictures of the Sistine Chapel, but you've never stood there and taken in the smell and looked up at that. You've probably read about war, but you've never held, a friend who was dying in your arms. You may have read a sonnet, but you've never really felt the love of a woman, and what it means when she passes away from cancer, all that. And he's like totally saying there's this lived experience. And I think that's one of the issues facing, and I, once again, don't like to paint the church with broad brushstrokes.
100%.
But there is, I think, a lack of real experience of Jesus that's very similar to the Pharisees of their day, who were struggling with the type of Christian nationalism that we see very present in the U.S. culture today, where Jesus was in their midst, God in the flesh was in their midst, and they missed him. And that's the thing that, as a kid, when I would read about the Pharisees, that always terrified me. What if I was so close and yet I couldn't recognize Christ himself? And that kind of haunted me and kind of always kept me kind of going, how do I really know Jesus, and how do I really experience Jesus? And I think that's a really critical thing that I think we need to take away, that theology, biblical knowledge, it is wonderful. It helps us know and experience God, but knowing God is a little bit different than that. And Jesus talked about that same thing, right?
Well, and increasingly, and this is a pet peeve of mine, so if you don't agree, feel free to disagree, but I feel like we've gotten stuck a little bit on biblical literacy. And I know that biblical literacy is important. I get it. It's crucial because it demonstrates a familiarity with the biblical text, right? And I think that that's important. But I also think that what we've been missing is, the way I've been phrasing it lately is there's not very many people who are going to mistake a bath for a baptism, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we should be able to tell the difference between, discipleship and political engagement, for instance. We should be able to tell that difference as easily as we can distinguish a bath from baptism.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we can't suggests that there is that deeper miss of, no, this is my relationship with Christ. And now I understand how to operate the world, and I can approach the world with a disciple posture. That's not biblical literacy. That's a different sort of like experience of Christ and knowing Christ, trusting Christ. That's a different thing than just, I have doctrine in my head, which, having gone through all the theological training, like I get that part. It's fun.
Yeah.
I enjoy it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm not dissing it. But at the same time, I think what I've had to learn over the years is it can't just be all letter. There also has to be spirit involved here. And so there has to be that sort of embodied experience with Christ in the way that we posture ourselves in the world. And I'm wondering if you have any insights based on the research, how we would go about cultivating that enhancing that experience within the church.
There's two organizations, or not organizations, but just kind of writings and things like that. And there are organizations attached to them. They come to mind that really have challenged me, helped me even navigate that. One is True Face Ministries out of Arizona and Atlanta, and they have a book called The Cure, and it's basically about this pilgrim. It's a fable about a pilgrim who comes to a fork in the road, and it's written by some friends of mine. And one arrow points to trusting God, and the other one leads to pleasing God. And the pilgrim kind of goes, well, gee, both of those sound good. You know what I mean? Like, which direction do I go? And pleasing God leads to the room of good intentions, and trusting God leads to the room of grace. And the pilgrim goes through these really interesting experiences, encountering these different rooms. And it's told in a fabulistic way that really gets to the heart of this issue of what does it mean to trust God? Yeah. And then the other person is Pete Scazzaro, who wrote Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. I've had the privilege of working with him for 3 years on doing a teen version of this. And
very cool.
And what we're finding is that so many people, even pastors, that have all the alphabet soup behind their names of their degrees and everything like that, that they kind of reach a point where they go, wait a minute, I don't have a relationship with God. Like I know about God, I believe in this, but I don't know God. And Pete's journey and his transparency around that, I think, has really helped people reconnect through maybe less of a mystical theology, but bringing in some like current research on what we know about our relationships neurobiologically and scripture, and then ancient practices, and kind of bringing it together. But your point about biblical literacy is so critical, because and I've spent my whole life advocating to eradicate Bible poverty through Bible translation. But the word alone is part of it, right? As you've said. I mean, when you think about the Bible in America, and in English,
right, all over the place,
most people haven't had access to a Bible, right? Literacy in the United States was, there was no economic reason to be literate other than to be able to read the Bible. And so, but most people couldn't even afford to own one. The American Bible Society started to make sure the Bible was available to people, because that was not a common thing. Their big breakthrough was, we printed 10,000 Bibles in a year, and everyone's like, whoa, that's a phenomenal number of Bibles. What a breakthrough in technology, compared to like what you look at what, Bobby Grunwald with YouVersion is doing now. Right. But, but that was huge, because people didn't even have access, yet they were still faithful living. And there has been for centuries. And so so the text is really important, but that is not the problem in and of itself. It's the way we theologize the text and live it out and embody it. So I think I couldn't agree more.
Well, we're getting to the end of the show, and I try
Man, it's
to
not
ask.
fast.
I know dude, when you're having a good conversation, the hour flies. So this has been awesome. I I usually try to end the show with a question for my guests, and I don't want to assume what you're going to say to this question, but here's what I usually ask at the end. What do you think the church in America needs to be thinking about in order to be and make disciples more faithfully today?
It's interesting. We've been asking this question a lot at Barna of
Mm,
pastors. Like how would you get, it's kind
yeah,
of like if you were asked pastors to give a letter grade on how they think their church is doing at making disciples.
yeah,
Most pastors give like a C minus.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, and it's probably a D plus. But think about it, that is that is an honest answer.
right,
And yet, as the church, we were called to make disciples. So this should be like the thing that we're doing really well at, or at least B plus. So I think it is kind of a critical question that you ask, because I do think that there's something about that, and I do think that we have to realize that we can't have consumers in our churches.
yeah,
That we have to literally live a life of faithful presence, because we want people to also be curious about Christianity. And right now
yeah,
they're not. They think they know that story.
yeah,
And when we're living a faithful presence in our communities and in our neighborhoods, I think the gospel shows up in really amazing ways. And so, um, you know, in the scripture, in the Old Testament, you see you're either in Israel or you're living in exile, right?
yeah, yeah,
And for the New Testament believer, we are always in exile. Our spiritual regeneration means that our citizenship is now in heaven.
yeah,
And in the United States, because we have Christianized the founding of our country so much, we have adopted a paradigm of dual citizenship. I'm a
yeah,
citizen of the United States, and I'm also a citizen of heaven.
right.
But biblically, theologically, and you can disagree with me if you want, I think we're only citizens of
I won't.
heaven, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so we're encouraged to live as aliens and strangers, resident aliens, in
yeah,
this
yeah,
world. We're ambassadors, right? A foreigner
right.
living in a different place. And I think that if we can really adopt that idea, I don't belong to the place that I reside at. That is not where my allegiance and my loyalty is.
Right.
My trust, you used that word earlier, it's a great word, trust.
Yeah.
My trust is in Christ alone. My identity is not in a political party or in political power. My identity is in the power of the one who sent me as an ambassador. I am in an official capacity for the kingdom of heaven. I'm an ambassador as though Christ were making his appeal through us, Paul writes in
Yeah.
Corinthians. And so I think we really have to tap into that idea as the church.
Yeah.
We really have to divide ourselves from that. And we need a better theology of heaven,
Mm.
because there's kind of a meme going around saying, hey, evangelicals, I got news for you. If spending eternity in heaven means spending it with you, I don't want to go. And so, you know, um, I've seen
Yeah,
variations of that
yeah.
popping up all over social media. And I'm kind of like, I kind of understand
I
that a
get it.
little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so if church is boring, then we're not doing something right,
Yeah.
because heaven is going to be so great. The memory of things past is going to fade away.
Yeah.
And, I tell a funny story if I've got time, James,
Go for it.
of working with my youth group, and I didn't prepare one night. And so I did the classic. All right, everybody, we're going to have a discussion. All right. I've come to learn since then that discussions actually require more
More
preparation than a
preparation.
message. Yeah, if you really want to
Right.
have an outcome. But I gave everybody a piece of paper and I go, I want you to imagine that we all know that Jesus is returning next week. What are you going to do differently? Right. And so what I was expecting them all to write was, I would share my faith, I would drop out of school and tell everybody about Jesus. And then what I was going to do after reading these was jump up on the coffee table and go, we don't know when Jesus is going to come back. We should be doing that right now. Right. That was the plan.
Right.
Okay. I open up the first piece of paper and it says, I would get married so I could have sex. And then I opened up another piece of
Yeah.
paper. I would get married so I could have sex. And another one, I would get married so I could have sex. And this is my plan is falling apart as I'm opening it up. And I look at my, my other adult leader there, like, what do I do? And he goes, well, hey, at least they want to get married first. You're doing something right.
That's a positive. Yeah.
But it made me realize, oh my goodness, we actually think that like sex would be better. I wouldn't want to miss out on that before being in the presence of God.
Right.
And that right there tells you that we do not have a good idea of what heaven is going to be all about. And so I'm trying to figure out, I'm on a mission to make the church more curious, because I think when we're more curious, we're more appealing to other people, and we experience wonder and the wonder of God in ways that is appealing to other people that are looking as well. And it doesn't mean curiosity without curiosity with compromise, right?
Sure.
I think that's why we sometimes don't like curiosity.
Right.
There is curiosity without compromise, and that's what we need to live into at the church, because it will help us have a bigger understanding of who God is, not a smaller one.
I love that, man. Yeah, curiosity without compromise. Because the other big issue we deal with a lot is deconstruction. And so I could see, people being a little bit skittish of curiosity because, you're going to be questioning things that you shouldn't be questioning, but that's not what this is. This is,
well, I would actually say that our lack of curiosity is what's caused deconstruction. Yeah. Because all of a sudden you have enough things that stack up that you go, wait a minute, I have to step out and figure this out.
Yeah.
Whereas if we welcome people's questions, and that was a part of the journey together as in our faith.
Yeah.
I don't understand this. I don't believe this. You know what I mean? Look at even Thomas, right? I mean,
right.
Hey, I won't believe it unless I see it, stop doubting and believe, you know what I mean? We take that as being like a pejorative thing, but Thomas was authentically experiencing his faith. And I was in the area of India where Thomas was martyred, right? Yeah. For preaching the gospel in Chennai. And, you sit there and go, wow, this is the guy who doubted, but it was an important part of his journey, and an important part of him coming to full faith and trust in Christ. And I think that's what we need to realize is, hey, God can take your questions. Let's make church a place where this is the place you want to ask them, not the internet, not with your non-Christian friends. Church should be the safe place, but we have to let people sit with those things, and not try to land the plane too quickly for them or tie it up with a bow. Or we got to be willing to say, let the rich young ruler walk away and wrestle with it, a little bit.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and I'm an Old Testament guy. That was my specialty, and so I've been writing some pieces up. I've got them in the works on discipleship in the life of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Oh, interesting.
And if you actually look at the way that God forms Abraham, it's exactly this process we're talking about. Abraham does some really strange things, arguably some immoral things, right? Maybe not even arguably some immoral things. It seems like he does some immoral things, but you never see
turning his wife over to that one king.
Right. Hey, just say you're my sister. But God doesn't judge him from a moral perspective. He doesn't come to Abraham and say, hey, you shouldn't have done this. This is he isn't judged ever. The narrative just doesn't go there. Where it goes is God comes in, shows Abraham how he's going to continue to care for him. And Abraham grows in his trust of the Lord as he experiences these things and goes across his life, which culminates then in Genesis 22 and the near sacrifice of Isaac and all of that. But I think there's an important lesson there for us, which is we tend to want to fill people up with content first, get them to adhere to all of these different things, and then start experiencing God. And it's like, well, those two don't have to happen in sequence. They could go concurrently across time, and people could really wrestle with this in a way that Jacob wrestles with God and the way that Abraham, I think, wrestles with God. Like, you see those paradigms in scripture. We just don't usually lean into them.
Well, the reality is trust is not a binary experience, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't all of a sudden trust God and now you're done.
Right.
There's something new to trust God with, right?
That's
There's
right.
constantly deeper levels of trust,
Yeah.
just like in our marriages, other relationships, and at work and
Yeah.
business. We learn to trust people more and more.
Yeah.
And I really, boy, we need to talk more about that, because I
I
have a
agree.
whole paradigm around discipleship and the role of place in
Yeah.
discipleship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're hitting on it with what I dying to know more about what you're digging out there in all of that. But you look at the role of place in trust, and how
Yeah.
Jesus and God sent people to places and dealt with places
Yeah.
to put them in those situations of trust. It's powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, agreed. I mean, I think it goes to that sort of embodied cognition that we're supposed to develop. And, particularly when I look at the life of Abraham, and this is just the one little tidbit I'll give you, but that initial removal of him from his father's family, from any level of security that he could have leaned back on to say, okay, it's okay, I'll try to trust this God, but when it doesn't work, I've always got this to lean back on. God has to remove him from that place and put him in a context where he doesn't have anything to leave on. And so there's no more crutch left for Abram. He's either going to learn to trust God, or he's going to have to figure out some other turn to take with his entire life. And so that place was really crucial, I think. The movement down to Egypt and his interactions there, those things couldn't have been taught to Abram in the land. They had to be taught in Egypt. And so I agree with you. I think the places we inhabit are really crucial to forming and shaping us into different sorts of disciples, and that we can learn different lessons as we're embedded in those contexts. Yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I think place is the missing component of discipleship.
Yeah.
And I've been playing around a lot with that idea in the back of my mind. And so to hear you say that, I was like, oh, you
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
it. But here's one last thought. So
Sure.
when I was in college, I read somewhere in one of the missions texts I was reading, anthropological text, the word for trust was lean on a tree and do not fall.
Hmm.
You can't see the root structure. You can't see any of that, but you lean and you put your full weight. And so
Okay.
anytime that I think about trusting in God, I feel the
Yeah.
muscle memory of leaning into a tree. And I've
Yeah.
always done that since college. And I can totally feel it in the moment when I'm struggling, like with my checkbook or with, a decision. And I go, wait a
Right.
minute, where is my center of gravity?
Yeah.
Oh, it's on my feet. It's not leaning into the tree. I'm not
That's
putting my
cool.
weight into God. And
Yeah.
that has kinetically,
Yeah.
like
Amazing
help.
how that stuff works. Yeah.
It really is. It really is. And that one thought has helped me, I think, lean more into my relationship with Jesus in a dynamic, real way than I have. And I still cannot find the source of where I read that. I've looked for it,
Yeah.
tried to find the word and all that, and I've not been able to find it. So if any of your listeners know, let us know, because I'm
Email
dying
in.
to
Yeah.
I'm dying to be able to give some more detail around that. Because people always ask me now, what was that word, or what language was that in? I'm like, I have no idea.
That's cool, man. Well, Mark,
I just know
I
I didn't make it up.
honestly, yeah, I honestly think we can go for another half an hour, but we
Yeah.
probably should close it up.
Yeah. Hey,
Um,
thanks for having me today.
This
I
was
really appreciate it.
fantastic. Again, love the book. I just encourage everybody to go out, check it out. Faith for the Curious by Mark Matlock. It's available on Amazon. You can get it at Baker. It's, just Google it. You'll find it. You
Yeah.
can
If
buy
you
it,
go,
read
actually,
it.
if you go to faithforthecurious.com,
Faithforthecurious.com.
there's some
Okay.
extra things you can get. You don't have to buy it through there, but
Okay.
but there's a way that you can claim some pre-order specials and things like that
Awesome.
that
Okay.
your readers may want to take advantage, viewers may want to take advantage of.
Yeah. And we'll link that in the show notes. We'll get all those links in there for you. So just check out the show notes if you're interested. But I'd really encourage you to pick up the book and check it out. Mark, thanks for the work. Thanks for the great conversation, man.
Yeah,
This has been
yeah.
awesome. And
great way to wrap up the day. So thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're doing this at the end or the beginning, I guess, of Labor Day weekend. So this is the last thing for both of us, but it's been a pleasure. So thanks for being here, and thanks to all of you for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode of Thinking Christian. Just want to take a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on the Thinking Christian podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
Looking for ways to stay positive? Brighten your day with the Free Story Behind podcast. Hear weekly short stories that showcase true joy, love, and hope. Listen now at lifeaudio.com or by searching for Story Behind wherever you get your podcasts.